and I'm here with Jason Ruiz, who is the City Hall reporter for the Long Beach Post. We're going to take you through the local election results that we know so far, and we'll talk about some of the stories that we're working on today following some of these races and interesting results. We'll start with Council District 2, which was Cindy Allen, a businesswoman here in Long Beach, a former police officer, versus Robert Fox, who's a local realtor. It looks like Cindy Allen is cruising to a pretty comfortable win in District 2, which is the downtown waterfront area. She's got about 55% of the vote to about 45% for Robert Fox. So, Jason, what's your take on that race?
Well, much like the presidential race, I think the city is glad that it's over. It was very divisive. There was a lot of mudslinging, allegations of stalking. Pretty much anything you can make an allegation for happened in that race. It was because of that, it was unclear, I think, for most people which direction that race was going to go. There wasn't really like a hero in that race, and a lot of people were really unsure of who was going to win. Mm-hmm. So if that result holds up, which I think it will because it has since it was initially revealed last night, Cindy will be the winner.
Yeah, both candidates definitely had their problems in the months leading up to election day. But it looks like Cindy Allen, who was backed by the mayor and by much of the establishment, is going to be the new council representative for District 2. In District 6, the results were very much aligned with the March primary results, and a pretty historic win for Suli Saro, who would be the first Cambodian American elected to the city council. And we're actually working on a story now, trying to get to the bottom of how many elected Cambodians there are across the United States. So, Jason, you've covered Dee Andrews for many years now. What are your thoughts on that race?
Yeah, he's the son of the sixth, is what he calls himself. Mm-hmm. He's a legend in Long Beach. A lot for what he did before he was a council person. You know, he went on to play in the NFL, played for the Cowboys for a brief stint, and really hasn't faced like a solid challenge until this year. And he was seeking his fourth term, virtue of a charter reform. And Suli really had, like Cindy, she had the backing of mm-hmm. the political machine here at least part of it. The more progressive part of it was pushing for Suli. And like you said, she had a strong showing in March and she almost won outright. And she increased that lead, actually. What is she up by, like 17 points now? Mm-hmm. So that one's probably going to hold. And it's really going to change her win has the ability to change the complexion of the city council, because Dee Andrews was more of a moderate and often sided with the more conservative voting bloc of the city council. And sometimes he was a swing vote where, you didn't really know which way a vote was going to go until Dee voted. And I think that's going to be a little bit more predictable now with Suli, because she's aligned with, the people who endorsed her, Rex Richardson, Roberto Uranga, and Janine Pierce endorsed her, but she's outgoing. So the more, if you want to call it the progressive side of the city council, has a majority now, like a clear majority, and we'll see how they exercise that going forward.
Yeah, and let's come back to that, that the idea of the council dynamic and how that might change, because the 8th district race, actually the incumbent looks like he's going to hang on to his seat, Al
Right.
Austin, over Tanua Thrash Entuk, who was just an immense amount of money went into this particular race in the 8th, with a PAC supporting Tanua, raising almost $250,000. And Al pulled in a pretty good chunk of change too from people supporting his campaign, from hotels and other business interests. So talk about that race.
Yeah, so that one was pretty wild. I thought, I kind of felt that Al would eventually win the election last night, but I didn't think that it would be such a wild swing from what it was in the primary, because I think in the primary in March, Tanua had 37% of the vote, and while she increased that, she's now at like 42%. Al Austin has, I mean, really blown her out of the water. And that was, I mean, not to say that he was underfunded, because he had a lot of money behind him too, but she had a lot of money behind her. She had a lot of the same council people who backed Suli and Cindy behind her. And actually, I talked to one of those council people this morning, and they said that, well, they're disappointed that Tanua lost, that Al's seat was not really seen as something that they needed to have. Like, it would have been nice to have won it, but they're not necessarily, like, it wasn't a big blow to them, because they still have 5 votes. They need 6 votes. Any faction of the city council needs 6 votes to get charter reform, but to pass any kind of ordinance or policy on a given Tuesday night, you only need 5 votes.
Let's talk about when you say the factions on the city council, for somebody who doesn't know anything about city council or doesn't follow the personalities. What do you, because Long Beach is a liberal city for sure, but so all of the council members are fairly liberal politically, but what do you mean? Give us an example of how these factions could come into play.
So if you ask any city council person, a current city council person, they'll tell you that their position is nonpartisan. But they also, I mean, you can see like who they endorse, especially like statewide elections and president. Like, they're clearly Democrats and Republicans on the city council. There are far more Democrats. I guess if you want to do the math, there's probably about 7 of them on the city council. But so Long Beach is a city of styles of Democrats. So there's a more conservative part of that Democrat bloc, and they have kind of voted on some issues with the Republicans on the city council. Most notably, earlier this year, there was an effort to try to pass a housing bond that failed, and Dee Andrews was the deciding vote on that. And that is, from what I've been told, was largely the reason why people, backed Suli. If you go back and look and see when some of these people endorsed her, it was right after that happened. So there are very few things that are divisive in a given year, but those few things usually are like big policy decisions, like inclusionary housing. There's a big vote that's going to have to take place in the very near future about how do we take care of the city's renters. And there has been pushback from the more conservative side of the city council in terms of how far they want to go to protect renters, because not to say that the, when you get political contributions from certain sources that you have to vote that way, but they do get a lot of support from the apartment association.
Well, and especially in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, everybody's hurting. And I think, some of the more, we'll use these terms just to distinguish, but the more conservative bloc, which includes like Susie Price, Stacey Mungo, Daryl Supernaw, probably Al in that group, have been sympathetic to landowners and property owners as well.
Yeah. And so just to clear up what I just said about apartment association is not the only contributors. There are other real estate interests, independent, people who work in the industry who support them. And again, I'm not saying that they're bought and paid for, but they do get a lot of support from them. What was the question again?
Just an observation that
Okay.
That there are these two factions. One is more conservative, a touch
Right.
more conservative. Where do you think that Cindy Allen figures into these two groups? So we kind of have this east side dynamic and sort of a west,
Right.
downtown, North Long Beach dynamic. Where does Cindy fit into that?
Well, her platform tried to position her on the left of this spectrum. Whether or not she follows through with that remains to be seen. There were some internal conversations, private conversations of city council people of how dependable she could be going forward. I mean, basically, I'll summarize it with this, and this is, a quote that will go into a story that I'm working on later today. Is one of the council people brought up a good point and said that what you see in a campaign is not generally what you'll see in a city council person. Like, you have to, or you do say things during a campaign that you don't necessarily follow through on for any number of reasons. So there are people, just because somebody said something or it was in their website as far as like what their intentions are, doesn't mean that will actually get carried out. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. She certainly had the support of the more progressive side of the council, and actually I think she was endorsed by almost all of the council. Mm-hmm. So where her allegiance lies ultimately, we'll find out in December when she gets sworn in.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how this new council, these new people, affect the dynamic, and especially now as the council's making pretty big decisions with the pandemic and with the budget problems.
And this is also assuming that LA County doesn't have just a few hundred boxes of leftover Long Beach votes that'll totally change these election results after this airs.
Yeah, and that's a good segue. Let's just roll through some of the other local races, which I wouldn't feel confident calling either of these races, just because about 600 votes is all that separates both the leading candidates in the Long Beach Unified School District as well as the Long Beach City College Board of Trustees. In LBUSD, the young challenger Eric Miller is leading Tonia Reyes Uranga, who's a former 2-term city councilwoman. He leads her by about 600 votes, has 51.5% to Tonia's 48.5%. In LBCC, Herlinda Chico, who was endorsed by most of the establishment here in Long Beach, has 41.3% of the vote to Dick Gaylord, who has 39.6%, and a third candidate, Lee Loveridge, has 19%. So, and that is a winner take all. So whoever gets the most votes wins that race, but it's a pretty slim margin. And then the last one is Measure US, which appears like it's going to pass with 57%. So any final thoughts, Jason?
It's time for a nap.
We're all a little tired. Yeah. We're all a little tired, and I think on a sugar hangover after last night. But we'll be providing updates on our website, lbpost.com, on our live election blog. So check back in, and we'll have more to come.